I'm Curtis Fink. I'm the chairman of Godspeed SC. I have this friend of mine here. This is Keith, and he has a phenomenal story. And I felt led that we needed to share it with the rest of the world. So the reason why I'm here today is I want to talk to Keith about some of the things he's went through in life and what brought him to this point. And Keith, would you?
Well, first of all, my name is Keith Smith. I am the founder of In the Gap Motivational, and it is a motivational company, not just to motivate and to inspire people, but to empower people to live a better life, no matter what your situation is, where you come from, your background, or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you like to share with I guess with the world about what brought you to this point? How did you get here? What was your situation like?
Well, what brought me to the point was I experienced something I never went through before in my life, and that was addiction. I got addicted to prescription pain medicine, and I stayed addicted probably around 8.5 years. And it got so bad that it started escalating situations until I got in so much trouble that I got incarcerated. And during my incarceration period is when the transformation started to happen. The change started to happen, and that's the point where everything started taking off. First of all, in order to get to that point, though, I even had to regress further, if that makes any sense. Because you would think, okay, here I was. First of all, I was a police officer in the hometown I grew up in. I have an addiction problem no one knows about because I won't talk about it. I handled all the investigations in our town, so I was head of the investigation part. Next man under the chief of police, so I had all this power and authority, and I felt like basically I was untouchable.
Right.
This addiction problem got so bad to where if you're in addiction, you never think you have a problem. But other people could start to see the problem, but I guess because of who I was, they didn't say anything about it, and I wasn't going to talk about it. It basically got so bad, I had to find a way to start funding it because I couldn't afford it just on my salary. So I remember one day I went to a guy who I grew up in the same town with, and I was at my mom's house, and he actually was in the yard, and I walked over to him, and I won't call his name, but I said, hey, I know what you're doing in the community. If you don't stop, I'm gonna give you a chance to stop and stay home with your family, but if you don't stop what you're doing, I'm gonna have to come in and kick your door in and send you to prison. And he's tried to tell me, no, Keith, I'm not doing anything. I said, listen. So I basically showed him some evidence I had against him. I already made some buys from him, knew he was selling drugs. And we had a conversation that he was gonna stop, and, you know. So about 30 minutes later, he came back to me. He had left his mom's house and came back to my mom's house. And he called me outside and he offered me a $100 bill. And my first instinct, and my first thing to him was, look, man, no, I can't take that. He's like, nah, I really appreciate what you did for me. But see, that's the thing about addiction, especially when you're hiding it. The more I let him talk, the more it started to think for me. So I started thinking, man, I could take this money and nobody will ever know about it. And I ended up taking that money that day. And I didn't stop taking. I started clearing a way for them to move drugs around in the community. And that wasn't the end of it either. It got so bad that it got to a point that I said, what do I need them for? I'm the guy who clears the way. Mm-hmm. I could do this on my own. So I started doing it on my own. And one guy that I was doing some business with, he ended up telling on. And the addiction was hiding all of that. The warning signs were there, But eventually on June 13th, 2008, I was arrested by SLED, and I was charged with trafficking drugs, misconduct in office, because I was an officer, and I knew better.
All right.
But the addiction was so overpowered. And then they charged me with possession of a firearm and commission of a violent crime. And I remember that day, they brought the SLED SWAT team to get me. And I actually got busted in Lexington County. They brought me all the way from my home in Marlboro County, all the way up here to do this deal. And they busted me, and they had like 20 people on the SLED SWAT team.
Wow.
And they surrounded me at the hotel. They rented out the whole hotel for the day. They had a whole operation named after me. It was called, if I remember from the court document, it was called Operation Dark Blue. That was it, Dark Blue. And I'll never forget that when they surrounded me and they put me face down, my face was right in front of a pothole in the concrete, and the pothole had water in it. And I could see my face in that mud puddle of water in that pothole. And I remember the first thing that came to my mind was my 3 daughters' faces. And then the next thing that come to mind is my life's about to change drastically from this point. But how it was going to change,
Right.
I had no idea at that time.
And see, that's the whole fantastic reason why that I want to do this video.
Mm.
I mean, you hear about what, and that's not all the details, and the more you get to know Keith, the more you'll realize there's a lot more to the story. But the reason why I want to do this video was about the redemption part.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, and you'd love to share that part, right? Whenever you.
Yeah. That is the main thing I love to share. And right after that, you know, I went to court in January of 2009, and they actually gave me 25 years worth of time in prison. They gave me 10 for the trafficking drugs, 10 for the misconduct, and 5 years for the possession of a firearm and commission of a violent crime. Well, in the courtroom is where God started revealing himself to me, because now they have been threatening me with 25 years. Master himself is the one that signed my warrants.
Mm-hmm.
I was tried by the state grand jury, so our county did not have control over this.
Right.
And I remember in the courtroom after hearing 25 years, I thought I was about to have a heart attack. I was 38 years old, 25 years. Man, this is like a life sentence for me.
Right.
But the judge, after he said certain things, is when God started revealing himself to me. He said, I'm going to give you the whole 25 years. He said, but I don't believe you need to do the whole 25 years. So what he did was ran my time 10 years concurrent. So at that time did I understand really what that was, but God was revealing himself through the sentencing.
Right.
Because even with 25 years worth of time, by him running it concurrent instead of consecutive, I didn't have to do the 25. When they run it concurrent, they take the highest sentence that you have,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to do that sentence. Everything else is run concurrent with it. So I had to do one 10-year sentence at 85%, because anytime you get caught for trafficking drugs in South Carolina or have a weapon, it is considered a violent offense. And so I had to do 85% of it, which means that I actually did 3,093 days in the State Department of Corrections, 112 months or 8.5 years, any way you want to look at it. And they always say there's 2 days you'll never forget in prison. That'll be your first day and your last day. And those days, even now, I can almost live them verbatim in my mind. And that sticks out. And I remember when I got to Kirkland and we're going to the dorm, you know, I get that same notion that I had that same day that those SLED agents had me down on the ground. I'm looking at my face in the puddle was, my life is about to change again. And I didn't understand, because at that time, I felt like my life is as bad as it's ever going to get. But it still got worse. And what I mean by worse was, you know, I had separation from my family. I done lost everything. Nobody was really contacting me at the time. I really think the first person that really contacted me to get in touch with me was Bill, my best friend, and he was there through the whole 8.5 years bid. So, you know, then I just felt separated and secluded from the world. But what I thought was a terrible feeling was actually God moving things in position where He could deal with me. Because some people you can nudge them, and some people you have to submit them. I always say I like MMA fighting, so I have to say God tapped me out, and He had to really strip me of everything in my life and rebuild me through the worst situation in my life to get me to a point to where I would submit to what He wanted. Because I felt like God had been putting stuff in me for years, and God had been sending people to me when I was in the midst of all this craziness in my life, and they were trying to witness to me, but God was sending them to give me warning signs. But with this addiction I was battling at the time,
Your mind was fogged.
oh, you have no reasoning.
Right.
So I didn't really see it. I remember one guy, he was a mentor for me back home. We was on the rescue squad together, and this is crazy because it was God showing Himself again. And He did this over and over during this 8.5 years. So many times it's unreal. But I remember He came to me in my office. I was sitting there, and he come to see me, and he said, "Keith, I just read this book, and I want you to read it." And I said, "Okay, what's the name of it?" He said, "Purpose Driven Life." It's by Rick Warren. He said, I want you to read this book. I think it'll be really good for you. He said, "It's helped me a lot." He said, "It's a 40-day journey." He said, "If you'll read it, I'll go to Walmart and get it right now." I said, "No, don't worry about it, David. I'll go get it. I'll do it." So he said, "You promise?" I said, "Yeah, but at the time, I'm just trying to tell this man something, get him out of my office."
Right.
And so probably about a month later, David come back to me and he seen me. He said, "Hey, have you read that book yet?" I said, "No, David, I ain't got around to get it, but I'm gonna go get it." He said, "Keith, please, let me go get the book. I'll bring it." I said, "Don't worry about it. I'm gonna go tonight when I get off." He said, "You promise?" I said, "I promise." Once again, I'm just trying to get him away, because at the time, you know, I grew up in the church and I knew who Jesus was, but at that time I still wouldn't want to tackle it because I felt like I was so unworthy with all the baggage I had. So he basically came back to me about a month later, and his response to me when he first looked at me was, "Keith, you haven't got that book yet, have you?" I said, "No." And he said, "Man, please get that book." And he left office that day, and probably about a month to a month and a half later, I still didn't get the book, and that's when I actually got arrested in Lexington. Well, I remember when I was first arrested, they carried me to Allen Glen Detention Center. And my first day, in jail, I really can't remember because I was so high from the pills, and then the next day I started detoxing from them. And it's like my third or fourth day I'm detoxing, and I feel terrible. And these guys are coming down to my cell, and they just checking on me, making sure I'm okay, because I was real sick in the middle of the floor. And this guy come down and he said, "You okay?" I said, "Just help me in the bed." And they helped me get in the bed. This guy from Tennessee who was locked up there, been locked up there for a year or so, he come down there, he said, "Do you need anything to read?" And I said, "Yeah, if you got a Bible, that'd be good." He said, "Yeah, I got an extra Bible." He came back, and when he brought the Bible back, he said, "I also brought you another book that I think would be really good for you." And when he handed me that book, it was A Purpose-Driven Life. And I remember laying there sick, man. But I remember looking up, and I said, "Okay, God, I hear you." And that's when I felt like, okay, this is as bad as it can get, but I brought it on myself because God was trying to get my attention. So from this moment on, I'm gonna start trying to listen for God.
Right.
Well, when I got to prison, getting to prison is different than being in jail. It's completely different. You shocked, you almost shell shocked for a while. The first thing I noticed was how good a shape everybody was on the yard, because all they ever do was work out. But then the second thing I noticed was how much knowledge people had of the Bible, because the other thing was you have so much time. You have time to study the Word. So I knew those were two things that I wanted to start doing. I wanted to start working out getting in the best shape possible, because I got 8.5 years I got to do, and I want to get in the best shape that I can, but I also want to gain the most knowledge in Christ that I can. So getting to prison and being separated from everybody was the beginning of that. And God didn't do that to punish me. And I always tell people, God didn't allow me to go to prison for punishment. He allowed me to go for preparation, because I really feel like He put so much into me. God says, I'm not going to turn you loose. I need to get a return on what I've invested in you. So if I got to let this happen, I'm going to allow this to happen, even though it hurts me. But I'm going to allow this to happen to get you to where I need to be. Well, I can remember that day that it really got bad. It was the first visit that I had with my best friend Bill. He was the first person that ever come see me in prison. So Bill had came, and I think this was probably around March of 2009. I think it was the March 2009. And we had a visit, man, and I just, he tried to be upbeat, but I could tell it hurt him by what happened to me as much as it hurt me. And then I started to realize, well, all these choices that I made, I thought, well, nobody's got to worry about it but me. I'm starting to see not only did it affect my life, it affected other people's lives that cared about it. So we had a decent visit that day. We talked and all, but when I went back, I don't know, for some reason, I never even told him this, but I felt like, just seeing him and talking with him, I felt like my choices kind of brought him to a place as well. Not where, it's just like he was kind of disgusted with, not with me, but the choices that I made.
Almost like he was in prison with you.
Yeah. And it was just, I got back to the cell, and I remember all that day, it was hard. Because now I'm in a cell by myself, no TV, no nothing. All I got is a Bible and a book. Because that's all they would let you have. When I first got there, because I was an officer, they put me on protective custody for a while. So I'm in that room 23 hours a day. I'm only out 1 hour to take a shower, and then you got to go back in. So I'm sitting there, and the next day, it's like the depression got even worse. It's like the enemy was on me, just like, you've lost everything, people are turned against you, your best friend is disgusted with you. There's no recovering from this. You got to do something. And at that point, I really wanted to die that day. I wanted to die. My thoughts were, I wish they would just put me on a regular prison yard and let somebody try to kill me. But that day, I remember it got so bad, I started to just cry. And it felt like my heart was being ripped out, because I started feeling the magnitude of my choices, that my family's gone, my kids are gone, everything's gone, everybody that I love and care about is gone in my life, and I'm stuck here in this cell, and it's my only world. And now, I can't recover from this. I was starting to believe what the enemy was telling me.
Right.
And something started speaking to me and said, open your Bible. And the more I would cry and try and start to believe what the enemy was whispering in my ear, he kept saying, open your Bible, open your Bible. Well, I had one Bible that somebody had gave me, and I opened it and laid it on the end of my bed, and I sat on the end of the bed, on the side of the bed. And I remember putting my hands in my face, and I just continued to bawl and cry. And I say, Lord, help me, please, help me, help me. And something says, read your Bible, read your Bible. But I still was so stubborn, I wouldn't look at it. And finally, I just fell over. I was tired of crying. And when I fell over to the side, my head was right over the Bible. And I remember looking at the Bible, and it exactly had opened to Isaiah 41, 9 and 10. When I laid it open, I had no idea what I had laid it open to.
I love when he does that.
And I didn't know God moved in that way at that time.
Right.
Looking back now, I understand this was God's first time ever really speaking to me. And he didn't speak to me in the audible word. He spoke to me from his word. But I remember looking at that page, where they fell open to. The first words on that page, the first part of 9 was not on that page. It was only the second part of 9 and verse 10 in Isaiah 41, 9 and 10. And the first words on there were, I have chosen you and not cast you aside. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will uphold you in my right hand of righteousness. And Curtis, you talking about crying? Man, I cried even harder. But I wasn't crying because I was sorry for myself anymore. I was crying because I felt like a weight had been lifted off of me, and that God was telling me, no matter how bad this gets,
Right.
I got you.
That's awesome.
You know, and it's like, from that moment there, that's when my life began to escalate in the other direction. Because I'm as far as I needed to go, so instead of worrying about how far down I was, God changed my attitude through that verse to say, you know what, I may have lost everything, but the only place to go is up from here. So from this point on, my life's got to get better. And that's how I started living my life in prison at that time.
And I want to talk about that. Where you're at today, can you tell me about the journey whenever you got out of prison and what happened to you since? Because like I've told you in the past, like I can't even talk to you and get that you spent almost 10 years in prison.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? There's not even a stench of your past. And I say that because you have a Christian glow about you that not many people who go to church have. But yet you've got something I think God gave you, and now you're telling people about it. And like I said, that's what this video is about capturing. So for me, if you'd like to share, what did you, when you come out of prison, how much money did you have in your pocket?
I had $750 that a friend of mine, Lee, him and his wife had sent to me through Bill to make sure that I had something when I came home.
Right.
So I had no money of my own, just the kindness of somebody moving on his heart to do for me.
Right.
Not only that, my best friend Bill, God had moved on his heart to let me come stay with him, because at the time, really, I was homeless.
Right.
I walked out of prison with borrowed clothes that Bill had brought me. I had nothing but a
And
prison
y'all pay
ID.
attention to this, because this is where this story is
Yeah, and
Phenomenal.
you know, to walk out of there and I had nothing, but I had an assurance that God was going to take care of me. I didn't have any worries, even though I didn't have anything. And I can't tell that part without regressing just a little bit to tell you some things that, God had to condition me over and over in prison to get to trust Him till I could get to that point. And even though I was going to stay with Bill and I had borrowed clothes and I only had this money that friend gave me and I only had a prison ID because they had lost all my other IDs,
Right.
everything was going to be fine. And I walked out with my head up. And I remember, Bill asking me on visit one time, well, you're about ready to come home, but when you get home, what are you going to do when people start bringing up your past or what happened? And I said, Bill, I'm going to hold my head up and I'm going to say, you know what? I know what I can do in the worst time of my life.
Right.
You don't.
Yeah.
God's allowed me to be pushed to the max. I know what my threshold is.
Right.
And I thank Him for that. And even today, I give God all the thanks and the glory for going to prison, because when I first went, I thought I was crazy for even thinking that. But now that I'm out, I wouldn't be the man that I am today had I not. My wife always says, you wear prison on your sleeve like a badge of honor. But man, let me tell you, when God shows His glory to you over and over, like, you can just climb a mountain. But when you like Moses and you have a face-to-face and see the backside, the glory of God, and it makes your face glow, that's just not a mountain.
Right.
It was something that God had to condition me with, and it wasn't major things. It was stuff that growing closer to God in prison and learning more about Him, it was the small things that made me appreciate Him.
Right.
I used to make a lot of notes in my Bible. I remember one time I didn't have a lot of money on my books, and for people that's never been to prison or know it, I have to explain that because I want them to understand. When you're in prison, if you're fortunate enough to have family members or loved ones that send money to what they call your books, you can go to the canteen and buy certain things, from hygiene to food to different things. So, and it's expensive, but I didn't even have money to buy a pen. So I remember looking at my pen, and I didn't want to ask anybody to borrow anything. So that was like the number one rule in prison: don't borrow anything from anybody if you can't pay it back. But I remember looking at this pen and I was like, man, I'm about to run out of ink. Curtis, I couldn't even see the ink in that pen, and it's a clear pen because everything you buy in prison is going to be clear,
right.
so you can see through it and make sure nobody has anything in there they're not supposed to have. But it didn't have any ink even showing. I wrote with that pen for 4 months in my Bible. The day that the money came to my books and I bought a new pen at the store, at the canteen store, and come in, that pen would not work anymore. And even since then, I had a call one time since I got out, and when I came home, it just, you know, the turn signals wouldn't work right on it. But anytime that the police was around, the turn signals would
That's
work.
crazy, man.
It's just like the little things. But walking out of those gates, and now I'm going to go ahead and transition, because I could talk all day about God's goodness, and there's a whole thing I can do about God's goodness just in prison alone, from the cake store to the potato stores to all kind of things. But walking out, I felt like, okay, most people are kind of worried, and there's a nervous feel in the room of people getting ready to get released, but not with me. I was, you know, it was like another day for me, because when I walked out, I had like an assurance that God was going to take care of me.
Now, what did he tell you? What did he tell you about going out? I mean, did he...
Like I said, there's a nervous feel in the room with everybody, because no one knows what their life is to entail. And it's not that God actually spoke to me that day, but it was a feeling like the Holy Spirit was giving me, like, okay, you've been conditioned for this over and over. Everything that you've seen and went through and you put together back here, now it's time to put it together out here. So when I walked out, I felt like, in a sense, Jesus had walked out right with me, so I didn't have anything to worry about. So one of my things leaving was, I said, I wanted to connect with my kids again, you know, and when I went to prison, I had one grandchild. When I came home from prison, I think I had 9. So I had 8 grandkids that had never been a part of their life. So that was a little worrisome, but not to the point that I was like, you know, God's going to take care of this, because I've been conditioned so much. And I went to Georgetown with my buddy Bill, and I started going to see my kids back home and starting to build a relationship with them. And I was so happy with just being out and being home that I really didn't put a lot of emphasis on other things that I was about to face for coming home. Difficulties of getting a job. Not only that, I couldn't get a job on my driver's license bag because I didn't have any identification. But I wasn't really worried about that at first. When I came home, I just wanted to see my kids and reconnect with them. But then I started seeing the obstacles that I was going to face. And for a person who's been incarcerated like that, that doesn't know God, it can be overbearingly depressing. It's like everything started getting at a standstill. And I was starting to get bogged down again, because people that told me they were going to help me get a job back home, they didn't come through. People that said, hey.
What year was that?
When I came home, I went in June 13th of 2008. I came home December 1st of 2016.
Okay.
So right now, I've only been home 2.5 years.
Right.
And I was finding difficulty finding work, different things. And, you know, that was stuff that I hadn't really planned on, because I was like, this stuff should come easy because of what I've been through. Well, even when God's with you, you have to understand He'll allow you to go through some tests. So I moved from Georgetown back to Bennettsville to be closer to my support system, because without a way to drive or travel, it was hard for me to find work in Georgetown. So I figured if I'm back home where I got a better support system, things would open up better. So now I'm back home around my kids. I'm near a support system, but that support system wasn't as strong as what I envisioned it would be. So I was still facing the same difficulties there. And even though I was rebuilding some relationships, my life right then was like it was put on hold. didn't have a job, didn't have possibilities of anything. So at that point, you know, it was just like, I'm going back towards square one. And for me, I can't speak for a lot of people, but when God brings you through a certain phase, it seems like sometimes you're going to get a taste of that phase again, not only remember what it was like, but just to see how you're performing it. Well, I started failing that test because I got comfortable, started being comfortable in misery then, because now I'm starting to feel miserable because I don't have a job, and I was so jacked up leaving prison, like everything is just going to come so easy, but it didn't, you know. But at the end of the day, I still felt like God had me. I didn't know how. I didn't know.
So almost like 40 years in the desert.
Oh yeah. It was like that. And I remember I was praying one day at home at my brother's house, and I started letting the enemy put things in my head again, like, well, now you don't have a job, all these people done let you down, maybe you need to go back to doing what you were doing before to kind of help your situation. And I started remembering how Jesus in the Bible, he never spoke a word to Satan when he was tempted, but he spoke the Father's words. So I started trying to remember verses to speak to the enemy, to get him to back down. But it seemed like the more I spoke, the more he wanted to speak. And all of a sudden my phone went off, and it was a text. And it was from one of the pastors that used to come to the prison that I connected with there and talked to on the way out. And I hadn't heard from him in like a month or so. But just out of the blue on that Tuesday, he texted me and he said, "Brother, what is your vision for ministry?" That was it. And there was God showing up again, just like in that cell that day with Isaiah 41, 9 and 10. Mm-hmm. And he was letting me know I'm still here. So I remember calling him and we talked and, you know, kind of did some things. But at that time, I had, before I left Georgetown, I got on what they call I got on a dating site. I never did that.
Yeah.
So eventually through that dating site, you know, I started getting a lot of attention that I hadn't been used to. So not gonna say, and I learned real quickly, all attention is not good attention.
Right.
I mean, it even got me so sidetracked that I didn't even spend a lot of time with my best friend Bill. I mean, it started getting where I couldn't sleep at night because my phone steady going off. But then I met this lady, and I knew something was different by the way she approached me from the beginning. And it was something different. And it caught my interest. And she and I sent a few messages back and forth. We eventually started exchanging numbers. And we talked all weekend. And without going into too much detail, we got together, seen one another, you know. I came up to visit her in Columbia, and she would come all the way to Georgetown to pick me up. One time she'd come all the way to Bennettsville, pick me up, bring me up here. And the more that I started spending time with her and coming up back to Columbia, which is a place I said I would never live because I did most of my time in Columbia, I started to enjoy being here. So eventually, to make a long story short, we started dating. I moved up here. We eventually got married. August of this year, we'll be married 2 years.
Right.
And August the 11th, because I want her to realize I do remember the date. So, but that's when I started seeing a change in my life, because sometimes, no matter what God puts in you, some things he puts in you, you still have to get watered by other people.
Sir.
Or God will put somebody in your life that says, hey, you know, I know what I've given you, but I'm going to give you this person as well, because they're going to help propel what I've put in you and even make it better. So, make a long story short, she really was supportive with helping me get my IDs back together, getting my license. She helped me even re-prepare my resumes. And now it's time to go out and look for work, because, you know, I want to be a productive member of the home. So now I'm starting to see this regression again, because no matter how good my life was being at that time or how we were progressing, I started to hear a bunch of no's. And our no's would come, they loved me all the way up to the point that we get to this incarceration thing. Why is there a 9-year gap in your employment? So we get to that, and I could see the whole countenance of the face change. And there was a lady at South Carolina One Stop. She was very diligent in helping me as well. And she would send me on these job interviews for all these management jobs I was getting turned down for. And I was like, quit sending me. I don't care. I'll dig a ditch. I'll work at the chicken plant. I just want a job. And she's like, no, I know what you're capable of. You seen your resume? You deserve better than that. Well, what she was reiterating was one thing that now my wife, who is now my wife, but at the time was telling me, know your worth, know who you are. And that's one thing that gets lost when you go through a transition like that. You forget your worth. Yes, God redeemed you, God saved you, but you don't feel special anymore. But you have to know what your worth is. And she started to help instill that in me, and Miss Faustine did. And so I went on this one job interview that just come out of the blue. The woman said, if you'll send him up here today, I'll see him today. We don't have anybody in the building. So we go in the building, and I go there, and I'm the only one there with the lady. She gives me an application. I fill it out. It was for a contract service, and it was called Advantage XPO. And I filled it out, and she looked over everything, and she said, okay, I see you have some charges on here. I said, yes, ma'am. She was like, well, I really don't know if we can hire you or not, but I'll see. My boss is not here today. He won't be back in the office today, but I'll talk it over with him. And I started to walk out like many times before, and I said, you know what, not today. Today somebody's gonna hear me. So I said, ma'am, listen, you may tell me no, and that's fine, but at least allow me to tell you my story and the things God has done for me in my life since then, and hopes that it helps you or someone you know. Because even if I don't get a job, if I can help someone else through my story, then I've won today. And she said, go ahead. So I talked for like 20 minutes. And after I got done, she looked at me and she said, Keith, I will do everything I can to help you. Now, mind you, God allowed me to go on a day that they're not even taking applications, but I got to go. Her boss, the general manager, which is Federal Summers, was not in the office that day. But when I get ready to leave, he had just miraculously left something at the office and had to come back in. So when he came in, I approached him and shook his hand. I said, my name is Keith Smith. Pleasure to meet you. I just applied for a job here. He said, my name's Federal Summers. Good to meet you. I went on my way. He goes in, Miss Jackie said, I'll talk to him. And my wife had a doctor's appointment at a doctor's office not far from there. It was like maybe a 10-minute drive. So 15 minutes later, I'm there getting out of the parking lot to go meet my wife at a doctor's appointment. And Miss Jackie calls me. She said, Keith, he said I can hire you. We're going to hire you for a forklift driver's job. And I was so happy because now I'm starting to feel worth something. Right. But now I'm realizing what my wife and Miss Faustine was saying. You have a worth. No matter what you've been through, you're worth more now than you were then. Right. Because of what you, not in spite of, but because of what you have been through. Now you're worth even more. So I get this job, and it is a contract company who's contracting for Michigan. And Michigan has always been a place I heard of that was a great place to work. And I'm like, man, I can't believe I'm about to go into Michigan plant up here. And so we were so happy. I remember me and my wife went out to eat. We called Miss Faustine in South Carolina One Stop. She goes to crying on the phone, and it's just God showing His glory again. Well, the next day, I get a phone call from Advantage XPO. And they said, Keith, this is Miss Jackie. I said, oh my God. And she said, no, you still got the forklift driver's job. But my boss had looked over your resume, and he was really impressed, and he wanted to know, would you like to come in tomorrow and interview with him and Jay for a supervisor's position? And I said, absolutely I would. So now I was so happy with just being a forklift driver.
Yeah.
But God said, no, I see more for you because
So this door is cracking ever so more.
oh yeah, it's opening up.
Yeah.
So I go interview with them, make a long story short, they offered me the job. They felt like I could bring from my experience a different perspective.
Right.
Well, I get to Michelin and I meet a lot of wonderful people. That's, you and I met from the start and we hit it off.
Right.
From like day one.
Right.
And
Talking about Jesus.
yeah, talking about Jesus. And the thing that really drew me to you, Curtis, was the way that you took a vested interest in Michelin like it was yours.
Right.
And I was like, man, that God's putting somebody in front of me to help me see that this is what I need to do here. I need to act like this is my place, and I got a vested interest in it. So I started to learn a lot of things from you, and we started to build a relationship. And not only did I build a relationship with you, God let me build a relationship with people throughout the whole plant, higher ups and
Other
everything.
managers, yeah.
Because God could see what was about to happen down the road. Well, down the road, Advantage XPO is about to lose this contract. And here I got these obstacles of being incarcerated. They say you have to be with the contract company for a year before you can even apply with Michelin. Well, one of the shop managers came to me and said, have you applied for Michelin yet? And I said, no, sir. He said, you might want to do that. And he encouraged me. And I finally said, you know what, God, here's what we're going to do. We're going to I'm going to start living here like I lived in prison. I'm going to trust you. So I'm going to fill this application out. And I put my charges down and all, and I sent it in, and they called me to come back to do the paper application. I remember I put down several names. I put your name down, and the lady said, you know all these people here? Yes. So to make a long story short, I go on the interview with Michelin, and we get to the part about my charges, and basically they said, listen, we don't really care about that. We know the man that we see. But see, God seen what it was going to take to get me to that point.
Right.
Because I had to go through Advantage, and he had a certain strategy for me and to show his glory to me. Now, could God have just put me in Michelin if he wanted to? Yes. But he had a plan along the way, and it was a progressive plan. And it allowed me to build relationships that if I would have came right into Michelin, I probably wouldn't have built relationships like that. So, make a long story short, I get the job with Michelin at 10 months. They say you have to be there a year. Everything that has happened to me since I was released from prison has happened to me a lot quicker than people say should happen. When I left prison, I used to work on the Operation Get Smart team. We used to work, that's the crime prevention program in the SCDC. But before I came home, Captain Williams, she made me do 3 things. She made me to do a goal plan for immediate release, a goal plan for 1 year out of prison, and then a 10-year goal plan to where we see our life and longevity. And I remember my 10-year goal plan. God completed that whole goal plan in 10 months. 10 months, that whole goal plan was complete. What I seen for myself from that situation was accomplished. What I thought would take 10 years, God did in 10 months. So when it says that he can do exceedingly and abundantly more than what we can expect or ask for, we have no idea. Even when I do prison ministry now, I tell guys, for those of you who are making plans for your life outside of here, stop. Because what you're going to see for yourself is really going to shortchange what God is going to do for you. And not only since then, God has restored everything he promised me. He promised me that I asked him, to connect me back with my family. He did. Not only that, he gave me a new family. Now I got a bigger family. I live in Columbia in a nice neighborhood.
We're in his house too, by the way.
Yes, that my wife decorated. She did a great job. But I've been able to buy 2 brand new vehicles since I've been on.
Well, I mean, what do you even do with that? I mean, and I say that because, on an outside world, they'll chalk that up as luck, or they'll chalk it up as.
Yeah, my wife, she doesn't believe in luck. She'll say, you're
Oh, I
blessed.
agree. I agree 100%.
And that's what way people will look at it is, look, but I remember God just has a way of doing things. I remember when we were doing that, I said, what else we got to lose? Everything else going so great. Maybe I can go get a new car. Well, we go up to the dealership that day, not expecting it. You know, at the start with you just say, hey, what we got to lose? Got God on our side. So I remember
You
sitting
already ain't got
down.
no car.
Well, one thing that he did was, while I was incarcerated, he protected my credit score.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't even think about that. So they run my credit. They said, man, you got really good credit, but you don't have a beacon score. And I said, well, what's a beacon score? They said, man, it's like you a ghost, like you haven't made a major purchase in the last 10 years. Why is that? I said, well, you know, I was working with the state then, which I actually was. I had a job in the state prison. You got to have a job when you're in prison. And he said, well, are you still there? I said, no, sir. He said, well, what happened? I said, well, they had to let me go. Well, they did. When my release date came, they had to let me go. I didn't know the man was going to put it down as employment. But they come back and said, y'all got approved. And that's just how God worked. But before he left, I remember my wife went into prayer at the table. And when she went into prayer, I already knew what the man's response was going to be when he came back. And he did. And not only that, a year from the day we bought it, I carried it back for service, for one of the free services that we got in the deal that we did that God worked out for us. I ended up carrying it in for service that day and ended up trading it again for a brand new vehicle 1 year later, which was a higher rated vehicle, and we kept the same payment as we already had. So that's been 2 vehicles in 2 years. And there again, my wife praying at the desk. And I know she thought I was playing when I called and said, hey, we got a chance to trade this vehicle. I thought you went in full service. Well, let's go, come on up here, let's see. So the guy, you know, comes back and he said, well, we wanted to get you a lower payment, but we can give you the same payment and this and that. And I said, well, if they'll throw in the gap insurance, we'll take it. Well, they probably not going to do that. I said, listen, you go back and tell them we pay our tithes, we're faithful servants of the Lord, and we're going to be at this table praying. So when they tell them that before you ask them.
Right.
So when he went back to the phone, he come back shaking his head. He said, I can't believe it. They threw in the gap insurance.
Oh, wow.
Praise God. Here we go. But see, that comes from years of conditioning in the worst time of my life to know God's going to show up. When it's his time to show up, he's going to be there. And you have to be ready.
Right.
You have to be ready to not only accept it, but be able to be responsible with it too.
Now, since then, since you got now, and you know, you live in Columbia, working at Michelin, what has your life looked like? Are we ministering still, or?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the thought of doing In the Gap Motivational actually came from when I done speaking in prison when Operation Get Smart, cause even from my incarceration, God allowed me to talk to over 250,000 people across the state and do over 3,000 presentations about my life. That's in itself is a testimony, but I knew that was something that I wanted to do continuously. So with my wife's support and help, we've been able to create In the Gap Motivational. I've been to the Department of Juvenile Justice to help teach a class out there one day. I was supposed to be there for 1 hour. I ended up staying 3.5. So much that they called me back and asked me to fill out paperwork to come back and start teaching my own class. They told me in the prison ministry stuff that I really aspire to do. You got to be out for 3 years. But like I said, everything has happened quicker, and you can't turn your paperwork in. If you do, you're going to get it rejected. But you got to be home for 3 years before you can even apply. Well, just a couple of months ago, and I've only been home now 2.5 years, that the prison that I actually walked out of with the bar closed to go home with my best friend Bill, they invited me to come back to be the featured speaker at the reentry program. So not only did I go back in before 3 years, I didn't even have to fill out any paperwork. And I walked back in and spoke to guys that I actually did time with and helped encourage them And now I've seen in my prison ministry paperwork, and my wife, she feels like that, and I do too, that this thing is not going to be confined just to the state of South Carolina. I think with what God's been doing at the rate He's doing, I'm gonna be able to expand this into other states and be able to travel extensively and tell my story and be able to help not only in the prisons or in the churches, but also in the law enforcement community. Because being an ex-officer, you know, I have a lot of things that I could do as far as going back in and having a consulting business to be able to tell them, hey, this is good or this is bad. And that was just another avenue I never seen that God created for me through this terrible situation.
Well, let me ask, and there's a, like we can look around, we can see the physical blessings of God. Now, I'm kind of one of those eternal guys.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about reaping and sowing in the kingdom of heaven. What have you experienced with that?
Well, you know, and a lot of ministry and witnessing that I do, not at the job or different places, you know, people always put a negative connotation when they say, well, you reap what you sow, like it's always negative. But the word says, for whatever we shall sow, shall we also reap. And the thing that I try to tell them is, you know, it doesn't mean just bad things. If you sow in good things, then that's what you're going to reap. You know, yeah, if you sow the bad things, you're going to reap that as well. But we have a choice in that.
Yes, sir.
You know, so in a sense, I had one guy say, so you telling me whatever happens in my life, I have a choice with it, whether I'm blessed or I'm cursed? Absolutely, it's by what you sow. I said, according to God's word, and that's what I believe. I believe that 100% of the things will happen that you believe will happen.
Yeah.
And if you believe you are sowing good, that's what you're going to reap. I can look at my life now. Am I perfect? No. Does God still deal and work with me and still bringing me through construction? Yes, I think everyone's still a work in progress. I don't care how long you've been in ministry or you know, serving of Christ. There's still room to grow and to get better. Even Moses, before his death, he probably felt like there were things he could have got better at to lead the people through. But at the end of the day, I know I've been sowing good things when I look at my life. It's easy for me to get comfortable, and I'm very comfortable in my life, and it's easy for me to see that because it's way more than I ever envisioned for myself. So, you know, sowing into other people, sowing into the ministry is always going to reap good things if that's what you're giving them. So, you know, for me, when I hear that verse, I'm like, if you got one train of thought that I'm going to sow good, you don't have to worry about the other side of that verse because you're never going to see it.
You know, one of my favorite scripture verses is 1 Corinthians 1:18. It says, the message that crosses foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved is the power of God. And I can see in your life that you have the power of God in your life. And I say that because I think we all sample it. We all get a taste of it. But yet do we understand where that power is coming from? And like I said, you know, your story is phenomenal. And like I said, I want to share it with the world. You know, I want to share it with, you know, pastors. And I think sometimes, you know, we would much rather, you know, leave that prodigal out there or leave that person in prison or you know, let them deal with their own devices. But I think the really awesome part is you took that mantle of faith and you run with it. And to me, that's the most glorious thing we can do for God, because, you know, otherwise there's you know, you squander it.
Yeah.